Brandon is going to teach a few weeks to finish up the book of James, and then I'll be starting to my intention is to start a background study. We've been studying in the book of Revelation, and I want to drop back a bit and go through a bunch of stuff from the Old Testament to kind of prepare the way. And this morning, I'm just going to do a kind of just a broad overview of timeline of the Old Testament. And one thing that is for sure, you cannot understand the New Testament if you don't first understand the Old Testament. It's been a very long time ago, but I went to college, and you know, when I went there, out of high school from Arizona up to Auburn, Washington, to Green River Community College, I wanted to get into and take some math courses. Well, I wanted to take Math 102, but they said, have you had Math 101? And I said, no, I had similar stuff in high school. They said, well, no, you have to have Math 101 from us before you can take Math 102. And why do you think that is? You can't understand Math 102 stuff if you don't have a decent understanding of Math 101 stuff. And my ultimate goal was to take calculus. Well, in order to take calculus, I had to take first and second year algebra, but I didn't want to take first and second year algebra. I just wanted to go to calculus. What do you think they told me?
No.
You're not going to go into calculus if you don't take algebra first. And why is that? You have to have algebra. You have to have a good understanding of algebra before you can even think about understanding calculus. And the same principles are true with understanding the New Testament. You know, a person becomes a Christian, they want to study the New Testament. And what book do you think they want to study first? The last one, the book of Revelation, because everybody talks about Revelation and all the crazy language and everything in the book of Revelation. Well, what should you tell yourself if you want to study Revelation? No, I haven't had Bible 101. You got to understand the first part of the Bible before you can understand the last. And the Old Testament is a big, long book. It's not fun to study. Just like I was thinking, man, I got to go 2 years of algebra before I can even start studying calculus. Yeah, that's just the way it is. It's not necessarily easy. And the same thing is true with studying the New Testament, any part of the New Testament, even the Gospels, which are very easy, especially John. John had the smallest vocabulary of any of them. He wrote in such simple terms. If you read it in the Greek, it's beautiful. It's fun to read, especially if you're a beginning Greek student, because you do recognize most of the words, and he writes it very easy, like a primer level, if you will, but deep stuff. But all of the New Testament, we've been studying the life of Christ, and in the New Testament, there's so many references, hundreds and hundreds of references to Old Testament things, quotes from the Old Testament, events from the Old Testament. And it's like if you start, I don't know, most of you have probably seen Downton Abbey. It doesn't have to be Downton Abbey. Just think of any series that's on. If you start in the middle, or if you start reading a series of books, the Chronicles of Narnia, or you read any series of books, you can start in the middle and get kind of some stuff out of it. But isn't it a lot better if you start at the very beginning? Yeah, it is. The same thing is true, even more so with the Old Testament. Jesus, and in the lesson this morning, we're going to talk about that. Jesus pulls stuff out of the Old Testament all of the Beatitudes he's pulled out of the Old Testament, and people that were familiar with the Old Testament would understand he's bringing stuff out that we already are familiar with, but he's putting more into it. And so you can't understand him putting more into it if you don't understand what was there in the first place, what I'm trying to say. So what I want to do when I begin teaching is to go through, I'm still formulating, but I want to go through a lot of the Old Testament passages that have references that are pulled into the book of Revelation, because that makes the book of Revelation so much easier to understand if you know the Old Testament stuff. So anyway, with that in mind, since I only had one class session, I didn't want to start heavy into what I'm going to be doing. And so I thought I would just do a kind of a general overview, like a timeline. Sue actually suggested this when I was preaching in Montana. I actually have done it several places that I preached, going through the Old Testament fairly swiftly, but trying to get what the essential information out of it as you go. I would draw a timeline, and I would have everybody in the class learn so they could just come up and write on the board this timeline with all the dates and everything in it. And if they memorized that, then they had a good foundation for the Old Testament. So anyway, I'm just going to go through at least some of that timeline this morning. But before I do that, I wanted to share this chart that I made a long time ago when I first was teaching an Old Testament class. And I think it's really interesting. These are kind of all these lines for Adam and Seth and Enos and all that. They're kind of to scale, so to speak, and showing the ages that all these people lived. But these are the generations all the way from Adam down to Noah and the flood. Now, as you can see that Noah, well, you can see on the line there's a line called the flood, a vertical line. This one here, you can see how nobody makes it past that except for this line, which is Noah, who lived 950 years. He was 600 years old when the flood happened. And I should just get the marker on the laser pointer going. He was 600 years when the flood happened. But and it's interesting. You notice Methuselah, this line here, 969 years old, the oldest man that ever lived. And look when he died. He died the year of the flood. Now, we don't know whether he died in the flood or whether he just died just before the flood at some point, but the same year. But anyway, that's kind of interesting when you think about it. But what's really interesting to me, oh, wrong way. Look at this line right here. This is the beginning of Noah's life right here. He lived 950 years from here to here. If you go up from the beginning of his life, you go up, and you see that Enos was still alive for 84 years while Noah was alive, which means that Noah could have spoken to the grandson of Adam. Enos, tell me about your grandpa. You think you could tell something about your grandpa to somebody that was interested in your grandfather? Sure you could. And just to think that Adam and Noah are so far apart, but yet he could have talked to the grandson of Adam. And even more interesting is this line, Lamech. Lamech was Noah's dad. He lived for 56 years while Adam was still alive. And so it's like saying, hey, Dad, you knew Adam. can you, that just blows my mind when I think about that. That's like, this is 1,000 years from Adam's beginning to Noah's birth. Let's go back 1,000 years to 1030 or to 1020. I can't think of a 1066 was the Norman invasion of England, William the Conqueror. Can you imagine your dad knowing William the Conqueror, or been alive at the same time as William the Conqueror? Or I don't know what else happened in 1020 or in that vicinity, but to think that you could talk to your dad and he knew people that lived then, what life was like, and all that kind of stuff. That's a similar kind of thing. So anyway, I wanted to share this chart with you so you can have it for your Bible studies. Kay?
Well, my grandfather lived to be 97, and it was fascinating to talk to him because he saw so much advance in our world that we have the history on. And to listen to him from a child forward was absolutely fascinating to me.
Yeah, and even talking to my own mother, talking, she lived in a farmhouse, no indoor running water at all, no kitchen. I mean, they had a kitchen, but even I, as a child, had to go out and pump water from a cistern, big bucket, and bring it in. They had a big ladle that went in the bucket, and you could either come in, guys would come in from working on the farm, they would grab that ladle and get a big drink of fresh water from the cistern. They had a wonderful spring. It was always cool, even when it was hot in the summer, and get a drink. Or if grandma needed to cook something, she'd take that ladle and ladle out water into whatever pan she was going to cook from, and do that. If you wanted to use the restroom, it was the little 100-foot hike out to the outdoor toilet. And even I dealt with some of that. But my mom would tell us about her job as a little girl was to trim the wicks on the lamp and stuff. They had no electricity and just things like that. Well, can you imagine going back to 1066 and hearing about what life was like for them? Anyway, it's just real interesting. Now, I had a thought that I thought of while Kay was talking, and now I've lost it. So maybe I'll think of it again. Sue, did you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say kind of the same thing. From the beginning of Adam to when Noah was born, just think of all the advancement they made. We think we've made a lot of advancement in computers and phones and all that kind of stuff. But just, I was kind of going on the same level.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Think about this for a minute. Look at the ages of these people. 900 years, 912, 905, 910, 895, 962 years. Enoch just kind of disappeared. The Bible just says he just was no longer. Doesn't say he died. It just says he was no longer. Most Bible students think that God took him because it says he was a righteous man. That God just took him. Methuselah, oldest man that is recorded that we know of that ever lived, 969 years. Okay, just think, smallest one of these guys was Lamech, 777 years. Can you imagine if Albert Einstein had lived 700 years? Or any of, Thomas Edison, or just, okay, well, just one thing. When I was teaching through the Old Testament the last time when we were living down in Arizona, I did a just a really rough estimate, just on real conservative numbers. And I calculated that at the time of the flood, starting from here and going through all these generations, and you know, considering the length of time they lived, and just guessing on how many children they might have had, and then their children, you know, all of that, I came up, and I've seen it since then, even higher numbers. I came up with 4 billion people could have been alive at the time of the flood. 4 billion people. That's pretty incredible to think about what the devastation would have been in the time of the flood. But out of 4 billion people, do you think you might have had a couple of geniuses in there somewhere? And you see stuff, people discover things like, looks like a machine or maybe a battery or something like that, parts of a battery. I think there must have been people from outer space come, because they found this kind of stuff, and they surely didn't have that kind of technology. Well, when the flood hit, stuff got rearranged and buried. Who knows what kind of stuff they had, with all these people living this long. And we're told in the Old Testament that, you know, like, I think it was Tubal, somebody invented the instruments of music and different stuff like that. And, you know, I'm sure if they invented music, they would have invented a whole bunch of other stuff. And you look at the stuff that the Babylonians and all those folks knew about astronomy and all that kind of stuff. If they could get that stuff in that amount of time after the flood, in much shorter lifespans, what must it have been like at the time of the flood? It may have been way different than we're think of these poor folks that didn't know a thing and didn't have any tools to work with. Noah, how could he build that big ark when you know, all they had back then was a club and a rock to pound a peg in, or something like that? Well, you don't know what they had in those times. And so it's just real interesting to think about some of that kind of stuff. But just keep those kind of things in mind as we go through. Gene?
Carol, I was looking at a scripture. Genesis 6:3, Lord said, my spirit shall not forever strive with man, but his days shall be yet 120 years. That to be taken literally, is that a figurative, or how do you understand that? There are people who live later than that, after that, live more than 120 years.
Yeah, I think I don't think he was setting a specific age that every person was going to live that long and no longer, or, you know, I think that was going to be an average for the time. That's the way I take it, at least. Anybody have any other comments? Gene?
On the late, Gene's referring to the 70-year period, which is stated there. Much later in time, if you go in and examine the length of lives after the flood, exponentially, it was decreasing.
Yeah, definitely. It did decrease after the flood, and there's a lot of things that, you know, you try to explain some things scientifically. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't really work. I mean, I've heard people say, you know, well, when they first start off, the earth was pristine, you know, and people lived longer. There were no, you know, diseases weren't like they are nowadays, and people had, you know, we have all this processed food and all this kind of stuff that isn't exactly good for us necessarily. They had just pure stuff out of fresh earth, you know, and all that kind of stuff, and that may have contributed to their long lives. And after the flood, things changed dramatically, earthly conditions and everything else. And so there may have been natural causes for the shortening of lifespans. Obviously, God is behind all of it. You know, nothing's done without God knowing it and saying okay to it, being okay with it. So, yeah, that's the best I can do for answering that question. Any other things? Well, okay, so I just wanted you to have this. There's 1,656 years from Adam to the beginning of Adam to the flood, and then after that, approximately 2,400 more years before the time of Christ. And so the flood is not even halfway from Adam to the time of Christ. So it was a long period of time that the earth existed, and mankind and God dealing with men quite a long time before the plan of salvation was completed. But let's just go now to the timeline, and I have completed timeline, as you'll see when we get to the end of this, if we make it to the end. But I didn't think to print it, so but I can print it and give it to you next week or whatever. But it's basically just a timeline. But things, it all started with creation and with Adam and Eve, and we definitely don't have time to do a full survey about it. But if you don't understand what happened with Adam and Eve, you really are hosed for understanding any of the rest of the whole Bible, and especially in the New Testament, because there's a whole bunch of people that teach about Adam and Eve that we inherit Adam's sin. And that's why we need salvation, is because Adam, they call it the fall of man. And unfortunately, too many times we call it the fall of man. And I think that's a bit of a misnomer. The Bible never says it, but I'll just say this briefly. Adam and Eve, especially Adam did not bring sin into the world. That's something that you're told. Everybody teaches that Adam brought sin into the world. Well, guess what? Who was it that ate first? Eve ate first. So that's one thing. But before Eve ever ate, what did Satan do to her? What did he say to her? You won't die. He lied. Is that a sin or not? So sin was in the world before Adam and Eve ever ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then some people say, well, yeah, that was Satan that sinned, not man. Well, sin was in the world regardless. But Eve was the one that ate first, and then Adam. So you can't say Adam brought it in the world. Eve, if you're going to say that. So what happened if Adam and Eve didn't bring sin into the world? What was it? What was the problem? Well, they disobeyed God, which is a sin. But what was it that they ate of?
The fruit you're told not to eat of.
The fruit that they were told not to, but what was it? It was from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Was it the tree of good and evil? So when they ate of it, they brought good and evil into the world? It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What does Paul say in Romans about sin, sin, where there is no law? Sin is not imputed. It's not credited to you where there is no law. So if there's no law, there may be sin, but it's not credited to you. Paul doesn't say there is no sin where there is no law. He says sin is not imputed where there is no law. God, there are certain rules that have been true since the creation, but Adam and Eve did not have the knowledge of good and evil. And so the things that they might have, one of the things that they were doing, they were running around with no clothes on. Now, if you saw Sue running out around the street with no clothes on, what would you do?
Cover her up.
You would immediately get something and cover her up. Because why? There's something wrong with that, right? Now, if you have a 1-year-old little grandson and you're changing his diaper or whatever, and he hops up and runs out the door and down the street, is everybody shocked and in horror?
No.
Some grievous sin, you got to throw him in jail or whatever. Why is that? Because they don't have a concept of good and evil yet. That was how Adam was. But when they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it was a little different than a child growing up and learning these things as he goes. These guys got it all at once. They ate of the tree, and immediately, what did they do? Hey, where's a leaf? I got to cover up. You know, they immediately knew something was wrong. Had they been sinning the whole time? Had they?
Yeah.
They had been going against it didn't become wrong when they ate the tree. It was already wrong, but they knew it was wrong. They all of a sudden had the knowledge, wait a minute, we shouldn't be doing this. And so that's the difference. Sin was already in the world, just like sin is in the world for a 1-year-old. Is it wrong to run up and down the street naked? Yeah, it's wrong, but you don't impute it to a little child because they don't know the difference.
If I remember right, they get from God, and they realized.
Yeah, and they immediately realized that well, first of all, they covered themselves, but then when God came walking in, they heard him coming, they immediately hid because all of a sudden they knew the difference between right and wrong. Uh-oh, we really messed up here. So anyway, if you don't understand that basic principle, then you can fall victim to things like Calvinism, which talks about you inherit, total hereditary depravity. That's the first point in the 5 points of Calvinism is total hereditary depravity. And where do we get it from? We inherit it from Adam, who brought sin into the world, and now we're all sinners because he is. That's not how it worked. That's not what happened. Now we are all sinners in one sense because of what Adam did. But what was it that Adam did? He brought the knowledge of good and evil into the world. And so now it's here. We don't have any excuse now. So when we violate any of the principles, it is imputed to us because we know we shouldn't be doing that. And the sin is now imputed to us because there is knowledge in the world. The law, God's law, is in the world now. And the awareness of it, God's law has always been here. The awareness of it is there now. So there's no excuse. You know, we're all, New Testament teachers, we're all without excuse. Romans 1, God has shown his existence by his mighty creation and all that. I think the things that he has made, nobody has an excuse not to believe in God. Anyway, the knowledge is in the world now.
This is a first example of the devil twisting and contorting the truth. There's a grain of truth in what he said. He learned the difference between good and evil.
Yeah. I mean, he said, you'll be like God to know good and evil. Yeah, well, that's a curse.
Yeah.
God knows the difference between good and evil, but he doesn't have the weakness of the flesh. Sometimes people say something like, do you know anything about whatever it is? And you say, yeah, I know just enough to be dangerous. Well, that's exactly what it is. Do you know anything about good and evil? Yeah, I know just enough to be dangerous. And God knows how to be good. I mean, he is good. Anyway, because of free will, we have the choice between good and evil, and every one of us has made bad choices along the way. And because of that, we need the rest of this timeline. And so obviously we're not going to get through this timeline, but after Adam and Eve, there's Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel were the two first sons of Adam and Eve. And we know the story of that. After Adam and Eve had eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they got evicted from the Garden of Eden. And also, I should just quickly say, God said, in the day that you eat thereof, you will surely die. Well, they didn't die physically, but how did they die? They died spiritually. They were separated from God. That's what spiritual death is, the separation from God. And they died that way. And then what happened? They were kicked out of the garden because of why? So they won't eat the tree of life and live forever. What does that tell you? Did Adam die physically because when he sinned? No, he didn't. But men lost access to the tree of life because of Adam. And so because of that, we die physically. So physical death is because of Adam, but man was not created an eternal being. The only reason Adam could have lived on and on was if he ate of the tree of life. And so he didn't begin to die physically when he ate the tree. He was already a human being and was going to die. The only reason he would have lived is if he kept eating the tree of life. Losing access to that meant he was just going to live a human life and die. We all, since we don't have access to the tree of life, we all live a human life and then we die. So we do die because of Adam, but it's not in the way most people try to teach it. So anyway, then you have Cain and Abel. You have the story of the sin involved with Cain killing his brother Abel, and that whole story. So you see right from the very beginning how sin is so horribly affecting the people that God created. Right from the very first two people that God made to their children, there was good and evil in their children. Abel had an acceptable sacrifice. Cain didn't. Cain got jealous and he killed Abel. And so there you have sin. The first murder is committed by the second generation of people on the earth. That's horrible when you think about it. But that's the way it is. And it continued on for 1,600 years. Man just kept getting worse and worse and worse until finally God said, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to have a do-over, and we're going to destroy the earth by a flood. And he had Noah to build the ark, in which how many souls were saved? 8. Just Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives, out of possibly 4 billion people. But you just divide, just cut that by a fourth, just 1 billion. When you think of a million people on a very, very, very conservative estimate died in the flood because everybody had gotten corrupt and just none of them were following after the will of God. After the flood, everything started good. Noah and his family started repopulating the earth. But as time passed and the generations grew, then people were still living a decent amount of time, although less time than they were before. And they started getting pretty just like now with politics, you have people coming along with these crazy ideas. They got this idea, let's all just gather in one place on the earth and we'll build this huge tower all the way to God, and we'll just all be congregated here and just be one great big huge family. But God had told Adam from the very beginning, I want you to populate the earth. I want people to live everywhere. And so God, when they started building this Tower of Babel, God then confused all the languages, and they couldn't communicate with each other anymore. And so they all dispersed. Everybody that could speak one language just went someplace. Everybody could speak another language went someplace else. And that's how God spread people throughout the world, was by confusing their languages. But it was simply because they were not doing what God intended for mankind to do. And so that doesn't pretend good any more than before the flood. You think people would have learned. It doesn't take long. Just like the children of Israel, when they came out of bondage, they all, within 40 years, they were all wanting to go back. People don't learn. Anyway, after the Tower of Babel, people spread out through the whole world. And so God decided, all right, now this is his plan all along. He's just unfolding the plan. But God says, okay, I'm going to take one man, and through him and his seed after him, I'm going to develop a nation that will be my people. These will be the children of God. Not that the rest of the world were all children of God, because he created everybody, but these were going to be his special people and have a special relationship with him. They were going to have a special law that was going to be given them. And the first one that was going to be the head of this family was Abraham. And in Genesis chapter 12, God makes some covenant with Abraham and promises him three things. A family that will be like the sand on a beach, innumerable. There's going to be a land covenant, this land that I brought you to will be yours, and also through your seed all nations will be blessed. And down through the line, the Messiah was going to come about through Abraham. And if you don't understand what was promised to Abraham, then there's parts of the rest of the Bible that you won't understand as well. And then Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons. And God reiterated that promise to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. Same promise that he had made to Abraham, he made to Isaac and Jacob. And Jacob had 12 sons, and of those 12, there was one who was Joseph, that was the favored son of Jacob. And through him, things started to happen, which would unfold. There's a scarlet thread of God's plan of salvation running all the way from Genesis. I didn't mention it at the beginning, but in Genesis 3:15 is the first prophecy about Jesus coming, all the way back in Genesis 3:15, where God says to Satan that because of what you've just done, you're gonna through the seed of this woman, the world is going to be blessed, but he is going to bruise your head, and you're going to bruise his heel. That's referring to the battle between Satan and Jesus when the time came. He had Jesus crucified. It was Satan working with the Romans and the Jewish leadership to crucify Jesus. But that very thing that bruised Jesus, because he didn't stay dead, he wasn't killed. He was killed in a way, but not to stay killed. In essence, his heel was bruised, but Satan was killed. the crucifixion of Jesus was the death knell for Satan. Because of what Jesus did, none of us have to fall victim to Satan anymore. None of us have to die with our sins because Jesus died for them. Anyway, I should have mentioned that back then, but this scarlet thread goes through, and it runs through Joseph as well, because Joseph, because through the providence of God, ended up in Egypt, and we all know the story of Joseph and how he was we might call it cursed at first, got thrown in jail, and all this stuff happened to him. But it ended up, because of it, that he ended up being second man in command to the Pharaoh of Egypt. And that's when the whole family of Abraham, Abraham was dead by then, but Joseph's family, Jacob and all that family came to Egypt to live there during that famine, and they ended up staying there for 430 years, kind of an incubator. A place to safely grow as a nation, so that when they came up out of this Egyptian captivity, there was a whole nation of people, maybe 1 million people by this time. And so anyway, that's where we have to stop. I thought we would get a bit farther in this little outline, but anyway, anytime you go over the stuff, it just helps to soak in. And perhaps next week I'll make copies of this timeline, and then you can have it if you're interested in doing that. So just let me know if you are interested, and I'll decide whether to make copies or not. Anyway, any questions or comments? If not, thanks for your attention.